John Neely Kennedy stepped through the tempered glass jet bridge with the unhurried confidence of a veteran statesman who had spent decades navigating more perilous corridors than this one. He paused only once, just long enough to greet a gate agent who stammered out a surprised, "Welcome aboard, Senator." A rueful smile flickered across his face, equal parts humility and practiced charm. His navy suit hung crisply from his shoulders, tailor-pressed to an edge so sharp it seemed capable of slicing through the honey-colored ambient lighting overhead. One hand clutched a burnished chestnut briefcase. The other gripped a neatly folded boarding pass marked C3, first class. At 63, he carried the kinetic poise of a seasoned trial lawyer, cautious eyes, deliberate steps, posture that communicated both readiness and restraint. As he reached the aircraft's threshold, the familiar symphony of cabin noise, distant compressors, murmuring passengers, the faint click of safety belts rose to greet him like an old acquaintance. He exhaled softly, gathering the invisible cloak of composure that so often insulated him from chaos in the public arena, then crossed the galley's polished floor with purposeful stride. The first-class section radiated a subtle hush, that plush atmosphere unique to premium cabins where ticket prices purchased not merely legroom and champagne, but a fragile illusion of private space. Cream-toned leather headrests gleamed under recessed lights. A faint citrus fragrance drifted from diffusers hidden in the paneling. A handful of passengers lifted their eyes from tablets and newspapers when Kennedy entered, curiosity registering in fleeting double takes. Some recognized him instantly. Others caught only the aura of importance that surrounded polished public figures. He offered each a courteous nod, diplomatic enough to acknowledge their attention, yet restrained enough not to invite conversation, and located Seat 3 beside the window on the left. With practiced efficiency, he slid his briefcase overhead, straightened his tie silk, cardinal red with miniature fleurs de lis, and lowered himself into the wide seat. The cushions gave only the slightest sigh. He pulled a pocket notebook. From an inside jacket pocket, uncapped a fountain pen, and began jotting a column of bullet points for an upcoming committee hearing on supply chain resilience. Around him, the cabin's choreography continued. Roller bags thumped into compartments. A voice 2 rows back chuckled at a podcast. A baby in economy tested its lungs. Jessica Reed emerged from the forward galley like a figure stepping onto a stage she believed belonged entirely to her. Petite yet commanding, she wore her royal blue United uniform as though it were a tailored power suit, each seam pressed with militant sharpness. Her hair ink black, twisted into a bun so tight it seemed to challenge gravity, contrasted starkly with the porcelain perfection of her complexion. Colleagues called her efficient. Passengers sometimes called her intimidating. On social media, however, she was bolder. At Just for Justice had amassed tens of thousands of followers who applauded her fiery critiques of conservative lawmakers and her unapologetic defense of progressive causes. Whenever trending topics overlapped with partisan outrage, Jessica's handle appeared near the top of the thread, punctuated by lightning bolt emojis and razor-edged quips. She had earned a reputation once celebrated in certain circles, scorned in others for punching upward at anyone she believed betrayed social justice. Today, as she moved down the aisle scanning for pre-departure compliance, her gaze froze. On the senator and 3, a recognition dawned in an instant. The corners of her lips thinned, hitching at an angle that telegraphed disapproval more clearly than any spoken word. For a beat she stood motionless, a porcelain statue cracked by an internal tremor. She had watched clips of Kennedy sparring with cable news hosts, had retweeted threads calling him a relic of outdated values. Now and probably, the man himself sat only 6 feet away, scribbling notes as casually as one might assemble a grocery list. Jessica inhaled shallow, sharp, and resumed walking. Only this time her stride contained a staccato edge, heels striking carpet with stifled ferocity. She halted beside Thea, folded her hands just below her nameplate, and spoke in a tone as glacial as the air piped through the overhead vents. "Good afternoon, sir. May I see your boarding pass, please?" Kennedy's fountain pen paused mid-stroke. He looked up, mild surprise flickering across his hazel eyes. "Certainly," he replied in that soft Louisiana drawl that could disarm even the most hardened political foe. He handed her the slip. Their fingers brushed. Static crackled invisibly between courtesy and contempt. Jessica examined the boarding. "Pass longer than necessary." She knew exactly what it said. She could decipher United seating codes in her sleep, but she studied the letters VAB, as though expecting them to rearrange themselves into an indictment. Finally she raised her eyes. "This is a first-class ticket," she observed. Each syllable filed down to an edge. "That's correct," Kennedy answered, voice steady, pen still poised above his notebook as though this were a mundane check at a coffee counter. Jessica's throat tightened. She handed the pass back with surgical precision, then turned abruptly. Yet even as she retreated, the tension in her shoulders betrayed that she had not dismissed the matter. She had simply adjourned it to a mental courtroom where a verdict against Kennedy was already drafting itself. Inside the galley she found David Meadows, senior purser on the flight, recalibrating beverage carts. David's sandy hair had thinned at the crown. Laugh lines framed his kind eyes. 25 years aloft had taught him the delicate art of reading people faster than any passenger manifest ever could. He cocked an eyebrow when he saw Jessica's expression. "Trouble before we've even pushed back?" he asked, half joking. "That's Senator John Kennedy and Thea," she said under her breath, wiping phantom dust from her sleeve. David shrugged. "And?" Jessica's jaw flexed. "He's problematic. Check his voting record." David's brow furrowed, but his voice remained measured. "Jess, he paid for first class. Unless he's violating policy, let's keep it moving." "He is a violation in principle," she retorted, and immediately regretted the melodrama in her tone. Still, conviction burned hotter than embarrassment. She stepped to a mirror on a storage panel, adjusted her bun, and let the glare in. Her own reflection steeled her resolve. Outside, Kennedy refocused on his bullet points, unaware that he had become the fulcrum of an ideological storm brewing scarcely 2 meters away. His pen glided across paper with a relaxed discipline, each note distilled to its essential argument. He wrote about maritime choke points, semiconductor incentives, and bipartisan strategies for infrastructure security. Politics, he believed, thrived when practiced as debate not warfare, and he prided himself on civility, even with opponents who lobbed rhetorical grenades. Civility, however, was a fragile currency aboard this Airbus. Some of it was about to be withdrawn without warning. Jessica returned to first class moments later, posture newly rigid. She drew a breath, feeling the recycled cabin air cool her tongue, then leaned toward Kennedy. "Senator," she began, voice louder, projecting authority. Passengers in nearby rows glanced up, antennae twitching. "Could I ask you to follow me to the galley? There appears to be an issue with your booking." Kennedy closed his notebook carefully, inserted the pen into its spine, and stood. He was not a tall man, but the calm dignity he projected lent him surprising stature. The senator's eyes met hers, probing yet polite. "Certainly," he said. Politeness was easier than conflict and far more informative. He followed her past the bulkhead, footsteps muffled by carpet. Inside the galley's cramped metal womb, Jessica crossed her arms. "It seems," she declared, "that your seat assignment may have been entered incorrectly. We'll need to relocate you to economy until we can confirm." Kennedy's gaze sharpened flint beneath silk. "I confirmed this ticket with staff. Weeks ago, it was purchased at full fare. Might you recheck? I have rechecked, she said, heat pooling behind her words. And my decision stands. A silence dense as wet concrete settled. He could have argued, produced receipts, summoned supervisors. Instead, he weighed the cost of escalation in a confined space at 35,000 feet versus the utility of patience and evidence. Political instincts edged out pride. If that's your ruling, he replied, I'll comply for now. Jessica felt dizzy with some nameless triumph. She escorted him down the aisle, past whispering travelers whose eyes widened with recognition or confusion. At row 37, she gestured to a narrow middle seat flanked by strangers. Kennedy stowed his briefcase underfoot, eased himself down, and gave a small nod that could have meant thank you or we are not finished, no one could be sure. Jessica turned on her heel, the scent of victory swirling like expensive perfume. Several rows behind, Emily Ortiz, a junior flight attendant, barely 2 months out of training, watched, troubled. She had admired Jessica's confidence since her first probationary flight, but what shimmered now was not confidence. It was contempt. Emily retrieved a bottle of water, approached Kennedy quietly. "Sir, is there anything I can do for you?" she asked, earnest and soft. He looked up, smiled gently despite the cramped seat's indignity. "Thank you, ma'am. Just some water is perfect." He accepted the bottle, unscrewed its cap, and took a measured sip to hydrate, yes, but also to swallow a sting of indignation. As the cool liquid slid down his throat, he reminded himself that measured responses always outlast reckless ones. And measured responses, when issued by a seasoned senator with a robust digital platform, could transform into seismic waves. Back in first class, Jessica resumed pre-flight checks, but an unease threaded through her spine. Had she won, or merely lit a fuse? She brushed the thought away, trading it for the satisfaction of Principal Dot. At 2:06 p.m., the Airbus pushed back from the gate. Jet engines vibrated through fuselage and bone alike as the aircraft began its lumbering taxi. Kennedy glanced out a scratched window, noting the sun's angle and subtle reflections of other travelers' faces. He reached inside his suit jacket for his phone, tilted its screen away from the aisle, and opened an encrypted messaging app. "Incident on United Flight 2187, he typed with poised thumbs. Moved from first class to economy under disputed pretext. Political bias suspected. Assemble comes draft low-key for now. Will advise." He hit send, set the phone face down on his tray, and allowed himself a single uncluttered breath. As the aircraft roared skyward, Atlanta's runway slipped away like a ribbon unspooling beneath clouds. Seatbelt signs dinged off. Chatter resumed. Kennedy unclipped his belt, flexed stiff shoulders, and reopened his notebook, not to return to supply chain bullet points, but to draft a skeleton outline for what could become a statement, if statement became necessary. He wasn't yet convinced. He wrote just 2 words: monitor developments. 2 rows ahead, Emily surfaced again. "Let me know if you'd like anything else, Senator." She shuffled back toward the galley, but her brief kindness lingered, a bright shard in an otherwise muted mosaic. Jessica, by contrast, felt the pressure in her ears equalize as the aircraft reached cruise altitude and realized, belatedly, that it wasn't just cabin pressure, but her own heartbeat throbbing in her eardrums. She prided herself on fearlessness, yet the senator's calm refusal to argue haunted her more than anger would have. In the jump seat, she checked her phone. A push notification from a news app flashed. Senator Kennedy slated to introduce bipartisan infrastructure bill tomorrow. She swallowed. Had she just inconvenienced an architect of legislation that might improve constituents' lives? She shook her head, refusing self-doubt. Right was right. She smoothed her apron, composed her features, and strode back into first class, distributing sparkling water like a queen, bestowing largesse. An hour passed. The cabin's din mellowed to murmurs, punctuated by the soft clink of ice in tumblers. In row 37, Kennedy maintained an easy stillness, but inside his mind gears turned. He thought of Daniel Webster's counsel: never avoid trouble unless you are certain you can avoid it altogether, but never allow trouble to intimidate you. This was neither the Senate floor nor a Sunday talk show. It was a microcosm where power dynamics played out among strangers suspended 6 miles above Earth. Yet the physics of principle remained. He flipped to a clean page and penned a single sentence: fairness is a right, not a privilege bought with miles or money. When the captain announced they were passing 28,000 feet over North Carolina, Kennedy reached for his phone again. A new reply from his communications director waited: draft complete. Ready when you are. He tapped the notification, scanning a neatly formatted paragraph summarizing his displacement from first class. The statement struck the right tone, measured, but firm. No grandstanding, no personal attacks on staff. Only facts and a call for equality of service. He hesitated, thumb hovering over approve. Revealing the incident publicly would ignite a firestorm. Holding it back might allow it to fade, but at what cost to every traveler who lacked the platform to fight back? He left the message unread for now and closed his eyes. The hum of engines deepened into a hypnotic drone. He pictured his childhood. In Zachary, Louisiana, where his father taught him, never mistake good manners for weakness, but also never confuse power with righteousness. That dual lesson had guided him through courtroom brawls, legislative logjams, and televised ambushes. It guided him still as he sat cramped between a college student watching cartoons on a tablet and a real estate broker reviewing spreadsheets. Jessica observed none of this reflective calculus. She was busy troubleshooting a jammed coffee maker, rehearsing tomorrow's Instagram caption, standing up for what's right, on the ground or at 30,000 feet, and telling herself she'd done the airline and perhaps the nation a service. Yet she didn't post. Something held her back: the senator's uncheckable calm, the way it shimmered like black ice, beautiful until you skidded. Near the halfway mark of the flight, Emily quietly set a linen-wrapped cookie on Kennedy's tray. He removed a monogrammed pen from his pocket, initials J and K, and wrote thank you on his boarding pass, folding it so only Emily would discover the words later. Small courtesies, he believed, nourished dignity in the harshest atmospheres. He checked his phone one final time. The director's draft still awaited approval. He typed back a single phrase: hold message. Then he powered the device down completely. A symbolic ceasefire that bought him time to weigh the moral calculus at 500 miles per hour. Outside the window, dusk began its slow, violet unfurling. City lights far below flickered like a constellation, scattered across invisible terrain. Kennedy traced individual pinpricks with his gaze, imagining families beneath them, travelers, workers finishing shifts, children doing homework. Fairness, he reminded himself, belonged to all of them. And if fairness faltered under the weight of one person's prejudice, however minor, however mundane, then perhaps it was worth leveraging every tool at his disposal to correct the tilt. He reopened the notebook and wrote a new sentence in bold ink: if patience fails to correct wrongs, principle must. Decision forthcoming. But that decision, whether to ignite his digital megaphone, would wait. Patience, after all, still had minutes left on the clock. Here is part 2 of the rewritten story, continuing from where part 1 ended. Each section preserves the tone, structure, and emotional rhythm of the original while expanding it toward the requested word count of approximately 5,000 words. Part 2. Plane sailed steadily at 35,000 feet, cutting a tranquil path through clouds tinged with the last light of day. The steady hum of jet engines formed a white noise backdrop that masked the emotional turbulence brewing mid-cabin. Passengers sipped ginger ale, dozed off beneath fleece blankets, or scrolled aimlessly through preloaded movies. But in seat 37B, wedged between a young man humming through his earbuds and a woman immersed in her spreadsheet, Senator John Neely Kennedy remained perfectly still, his posture upright, expression unreadable. Across from him, in seat 37C, Emily. Ortiz noticed the subtle way Kennedy held himself, not angry, not flustered, but composed in a way that made her second-guess what she'd witnessed earlier. It wasn't just the forced relocation from first class to economy. It was the manner in which he endured it. There had been no dramatic objection, no sarcastic retort. Just quiet compliance that somehow echoed louder than outrage. That kind of stillness made people uneasy, and Emily sensed its meaning. This wasn't over. She returned to the galley and checked on supplies, but her thoughts circled back to her senior colleague, Jessica Reed, who now busied herself replenishing lemon wedges and organizing sugar packets. Jessica's movements were tight and overly precise, her lips pressed into a constant line. Emily could feel the air between them thicken with tension. "You okay?" Emily asked softly, though she already knew the answer. Jessica didn't look up. "Fine, just fine." But she wasn't fine, not even close. Jessica had spent the last hour locked in a mental courtroom, interrogating herself in a crossfire of conviction and doubt. She had acted quickly, on instinct, motivated by what she thought was right. But somewhere between the adrenaline and the silence that followed, her moral certainty had started to fracture. She hadn't posted about it yet, her usual response to political clashes. Something restrained her. David, the senior attendant, entered the galley holding a tablet. His graying eyebrows arched. "Jess," he said quietly, "take a look at this." Jessica reluctantly stepped forward, eyes darting toward the screen. It was Kennedy's official social media page on X. The post was now live. Displaced from first class to economy on United Flight 2187. Reason? Still unclear, but the implications are clear enough. Political bias at 35,000 feet isn't turbulence, it's injustice. #boycott United. The word struck like a cold slap. Beneath them, a photo showed Kennedy's crammed economy seat. The contrast between the senator's composed face and the claustrophobic environment he now sat in made the message hit harder. Likes and retweets had already soared past 50,000. Comments ranged from outrage to encouragement. Influencers had begun resharing it. Political figures were chiming in. A tweet from a verified account read, "If they can treat a sitting U.S. senator like this, imagine how they treat the rest of us. Unacceptable. #United discriminates." Jessica stepped back. "He's twisting it. He's making it political," she whispered, but her voice sounded like someone losing an argument with herself. David exhaled slowly, folding his arms. "It is political now. Doesn't matter what you intended. What matters is how it landed." And this landed hard. Another push notification lit up David's screen. United Airlines stock had dropped 2.8% since the tweet went live. Jessica leaned against the wall, the sterile galley now feeling like a pressure chamber. "This wasn't what I wanted," she muttered. David looked at her closely. "What did you want?" Jessica didn't answer. Back in economy, Kennedy had resumed his notes. The phone buzzed again, this time a text from his chief of staff. "Post is exploding. News outlets asking for comment. Holding pattern unless you say otherwise." He responded with a brief message. "Monitor reactions. Do not escalate without cause." Kennedy wasn't interested in theatrics. He had no intention of turning this into a spectacle. But he knew better than to let it go unnoticed. His personal dignity wasn't the point, it was about precedent. If a senator could be treated with disregard based on ideological friction, what protections did ordinary Americans have? The captain's voice broke the silence with an update. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into Washington, D.C. shortly. Please fasten seatbelts and stow all items. Emily moved through the cabin efficiently, checking buckles and collecting stray cups. She paused by Kennedy's seat. Sir, we'll be landing soon. Can I get you anything? He smiled faintly. Just a smooth landing, Ms. Ortiz. She nodded and returned to the front, but his words lingered. She could sense the weight behind them. As the plane tilted downward, Jessica steadied herself at the galley entrance. She couldn't avoid what came next. Passengers began gathering their belongings. The mood on board was polite, but laced with tension, as if everyone was aware of something unsaid. Kennedy remained seated until most had cleared the aisle. He stood, collected his briefcase, and walked toward the front exit. Jessica, positioned there as part of disembarkation protocol, forced a smile. "Thank you for flying United, Senator," she said, voice thin and dry. Kennedy stopped, turned, and looked her in the eye. "I suspect we'll speak again soon." His tone was so calm it felt like thunder in slow motion. Then he walked out, briefcase in hand, into the fluorescent-lit tunnel of Reagan National Airport. Jessica stood frozen. 30 seconds later, 2 uniformed officers entered the aircraft. David saw them first and instinctively stepped aside. "Jessica Reed?" one officer asked, scanning a clipboard. She nodded. "Yes. We need to speak with you. There's been a formal complaint regarding this flight." Jessica's heart dropped. Her mouth opened, but no words came. David watched in silence, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The officers escorted her through the jet bridge while passengers and crew turned to watch, whispering. Her feet felt heavy, as if gravity itself had turned against her. Each step sounded like a gavel in her ears. Outside, Kennedy stood near the terminal gate, typing on his phone. His post had crossed 100,000 shares. Conservative commentators were already discussing it on live television. Cable news crawlers scrolled breaking. Senator Kennedy removed from first class over political bias across screens nationwide. A staff member approached. "Senator, reporters are assembling outside baggage claim." "Let them wait," Kennedy replied without looking up. "We're not feeding the fire. We're fanning it with policy, not drama." He turned to walk toward baggage claim. The plan was no longer reactive, it was in motion. Every message, every headline, every legislative lever, he would use them. Not for revenge, but for reckoning. Inside a private room near United Airlines operations headquarters, Jessica sat at a steel table, hands clasped tightly. The 2 corporate investigators across from her were polite, but emotionless. "Miss Reed," one began, "we're investigating an incident reported by Senator John Kennedy involving seat reassignment without proper justification. Please walk us through what occurred." Jessica's throat felt dry. I recognized him. I knew who he was, and I believed his presence in first class would be—" The second investigator interjected. "Inappropriate?" She nodded hesitantly. "Yes." "And based on that, you moved him to economy?" Jessica tried to explain. "I thought it would avoid conflict with other passengers." "You had no policy violation or complaint?" She shook her head. "No, but I felt it was the right call." The lead investigator's pen paused. "You felt? That's not United Airlines procedure." Jessica's pulse thundered in her ears. "I acted on instinct." "And your instinct has cost us nearly $300 million in market value," the investigator said coldly. "Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" The words fell like bricks. She couldn't speak. "Prepare a written statement. And understand your employment status is under immediate review." Back in D.C., Kennedy walked through the terminal, briefcase in hand, as people around him whispered and pointed. Some stopped to thank him. Others simply offered nods of quiet solidarity. Outside, reporters crowded behind barricades. Questions flew. Cameras flashed. Kennedy paused at the edge of the crowd and faced them. "I'll make a brief statement," he said, voice calm, microphone clipped to his lapel. "What happened today is not about me. It's about how easily power can be abused. In the name of ideology. No one, regardless of political belief, should be treated differently for who they are. This is about dignity and accountability." He walked away before questions could fly. Inside the United Airlines boardroom the next morning, panic had settled like fog. Executives reviewed graphs showing stock plunges and cancellations. Margaret Larson, CEO, dialed Kennedy's office personally. "Senator, we'd like to meet," she said, her voice taut. "I'm available at noon." Kennedy replied at noon sharp. Kennedy sat across from Larson, composed and direct. She offered an apology. He nodded but raised a hand. "This isn't just about one employee," he said. "It's about culture. Fix it." He demanded new policies, mandatory anti-bias training, updated flight crew protocols, and an open feedback system. Larson agreed to every request. By 5 p.m. United's PR team released a statement promising changes. But the damage was done. A boycott movement had already matured into a cultural moment. Jessica received a termination notice by email that night. Her hands trembled as she read it. Her world, once so certain, had collapsed in one decision made from pride and prejudice. The silence in her apartment was deafening. No applause. No posts. No likes. She stared at her screen for an hour before writing an email. Subject: to Senator Kennedy Body, I misjudged you. I acted from bias and failed my duty. I am truly sorry. I will spend the rest of my life making this right. She clicked send. It wasn't redemption. But it was a beginning. Weeks turned into months, yet the ripple effects from Flight 2187 kept widening like circles pressed into still water. United C-suite scrambled to fulfill every promise made in that tense boardroom meeting with Senator John Neely Kennedy. They retained an outside consultancy, revamped crew manuals, and launched a well-publicized Respect in the Skies initiative. Flight attendants watched mandatory videos on bias, completed interactive case studies, and signed electronic acknowledgments. A new cabin reporting portal allowed travelers to flag misconduct in real time, feeding data into a dashboard visible to top management. Publicly, executives projected confidence. Privately, they hoped the reforms would salvage the airline's bruised reputation before the busy holiday season. Kennedy observed these moves with guarded optimism. Each Friday, his chief of staff slid a progress brief across his desk. Updated compliance figures, social sentiment graphs, early customer satisfaction metrics. When numbers trended upward, Kennedy nodded. When they dipped, he circled problem points in red ink and requested follow-up letters to the CEO. In committee hearings, he cited United as proof that public pressure could compel corporations to confront prejudice, not through slogans but through measurable change. Cable news hosts invited him on air to celebrate the victory, but he declined. The story wasn't his to celebrate, he said. The only victory worth recognizing would be felt by passengers who would never learn his name. Meanwhile, Jessica Reed rebuilt her life far from the roar of jet engines. The nonprofit that hired her, Equity Works, assigned her to an outreach program that hosted workshops for service industry employees. On Monday mornings, she greeted hotel clerks, baristas, Gym attendants, frontline workers whose daily choices could amplify dignity or diminish it. Standing before them in modest conference rooms, she told her story without varnish. The snap judgment, the viral backlash, the job lost in a single afternoon. At first, her voice shook. But the more she spoke, the steadier it grew until she delivered her cautionary tale with clear-eyed humility and just enough humor to make the lesson stick. Participants leaned in when she described the moment officers had escorted her off the plane. The metallic taste of panic, the lonely echo of each footstep, the awful clarity that no retweet could undo harm already done. By the end of each session, hands shot up, people eager to confess their own blind spots, to ask how to do better. Jessica never offered easy formulas, only the hard-won truth. Slow down. Check the story in your head. Choose fairness over pride, because the cost of pride is always paid in someone else's dignity first, then your own. She kept a careful distance from social media. But one rainy evening she opened her inbox to find a 2-sentence reply from Senator Kennedy, dated weeks earlier. Thank you for your apology. Accountability is the first step, growth is the next. I wish you well in the work ahead. JNK. The words were simple, yet they landed with the quiet weight of forgiveness. She printed the email, slid it into a notebook, and carried it to every workshop, not to brandish as a trophy, but to remind herself that bridges, once burned, could still be rebuilt plank by plank. In Washington, the senator's calendar overflowed. Committee markups, floor votes, a bipartisan delegation to review coastal port security. Still, he made time to track United's reforms. His staff flagged an encouraging metric. In-flight bias complaints had fallen 32% since the new training rolled out. Kennedy penciled a note to call CEO Margaret Larson with congratulations and one caution. Improvement is a habit, not a headline. Then came an unexpected invitation. Equity Works planned a summit titled Frontline Fairness, bringing together airlines, hospitality chains, labor unions, and legislators. They asked Kennedy to deliver the keynote and suggested Jessica Reed introduce him, illustrating how accountability and growth could meet on the same stage. Some advisors urged him to decline. Optics are risky. Let the story fade. Kennedy listened politely, then accepted. Risk, he believed, was unavoidable. Integrity required meeting it head-on. On a crisp fall morning, the summit convened in a glass-walled auditorium overlooking the Potomac. Attendees checked badges, balanced coffees, and murmured about seeing a U.S. senator and the flight attendant who had once displaced him share a program. Reporters waited, pens poised. At 9 a.m. sharp, Jessica stepped to the lectern. She wore a simple gray blazer, no airline insignia, only a small pin bearing the Equity Works logo. The room quieted. I'm here, she began, because one impulsive act demonstrated how quickly bias can travel faster than any airplane. But I'm also here to show bias can be grounded and dismantled, one decision at a time. She recounted Flight 2187, owning each misstep. She described losing her job, penning that apology email, and dedicating herself to preventing others from replicating her mistake. Accountability changed me, she concluded, voice steady. But it didn't end with me. It compelled an airline to transform and open space for conversations like this. She gestured toward the wings. Please welcome Senator John Neely Kennedy. Applause rose as Kennedy approached. He shook Jessica's hand, a brief, firm clasp that felt less like a photo op and more like closing a circle. At the podium, he spoke without notes. We stand here not to relive a controversy, but to underscore its lesson, he said, the Louisiana cadence warm yet precise. He praised United's reforms but credited Jessica's forthrightness too. She turned to fall into a foothold for progress. That's courage. He challenged executives to embed fairness in company DNA, urged unions to protect workers from rushed decisions, and asked lawmakers to support transparency standards across all carriers. Dignity should not require a first-class fare, he declared, earning nods throughout the hall. He closed with a simple appeal: may the skies above us be as open-minded as we aspire to be down here. The summit ended with attendees swapping business cards and drafting joint pledges. Headlines followed, but they were measured, from conflict to collaboration. Kennedy and former Attendant champion fair skies. Cable panels aired clips of the handshake. Online chatter trended less toward outrage and more toward possibility. Months later, Flight 2187 became a training case in business ethics courses. Professors dissected decision trees, crisis response, the anatomy of an apology. United's quarterly report showed a rebound in bookings and a 10-point rise in customer satisfaction scores. Shareholders breathed easier. Margaret Larson sent handwritten thank you notes to both Kennedy and Jessica, crediting them for catalyzing culture change no consultancy alone could have achieved. As for Jessica, she continued leading workshops, but she also enrolled in evening classes to pursue a master's degree in organizational psychology. Her goal: help industries design systems that outthink bias before bias can think for people. She kept the senator's email pinned above her desk, next to a sticky note that read, "Impact greater than intent." Kennedy, ever practical, returned to legislative battles, trade, energy, veterans' health. Yet on each trip he booked coach intentionally, believing symbolism mattered. Boarding one winter flight to Minneapolis, a young gate agent scanned his ticket and said, almost conspiratorially, "Economy, huh?" "You sure, Senator?" Kennedy chuckled. "It's all sky, son." We land at the same gate. Mid-flight he scribbled a line in his notebook. Accountability is oxygen. It keeps principle alive at any altitude. He tucked the notebook away, leaned back, and listened to the engine's steady drone. Somewhere behind the flight deck door, a crew member poured coffee, perhaps contemplating the unseen chain of respect that now underpinned every seat assignment. Small changes, he knew, could exceed the loudest headline in lasting influence. On the ground, stories about Flight 2187 faded from front pages, but their imprint remained encoded in corporate manuals, classroom lectures, and the quiet way flight attendant might pause, breathe, and choose fairness over assumption before speaking. That imprint, Kennedy often reflected, was the real victory. Proof that one incident, sparked by bias and dignified by accountability, could elevate everyone's altitude. His phone buzzed. A message from Jessica appeared. "Workshop in Denver reached full capacity today. Your quote about dignity?" They quoted it back to me. "Thought you'd like that." Kennedy smiled, typed a quick reply, "Keep climbing," and powered off the screen. The cabin lights dimmed, the aircraft banked gently, and clouds parted to reveal a scatter of evening stars, silent witnesses to the enduring flight of principle and redemption.